Here's some outrage for you. If you like being deceived, you will have no problem with this article. But if you like being told the truth, you're going to feel some outrage. Check this out. Before you, you see Janet Yellen, current chairperson of the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal and has no reserves. It's a private institution. Anybody who's looked into the Federal Reserve knows all about it, so I won't go into it. But her smiling face gives me the creeps, I got to tell you, because I know what she's up to and who's behind it. This article was put out by MSN and Money, MSN Money, and put up by CNBC. Janet's holding up some phony pieces of paper with dead people on it that they conjure up out of thin air and then convince people to accept for other things. The question that this article poses is, what could the Fed buy with its 4.5 trillion? 4.5 trillion what? You may ask. Well, it's 4.5 trillion of, as the article will get into sort of roundabout describing in a minute here, is treasury bills and mortgage-backed securities. So let's answer that question with Janet. What could they buy with their 4.5 trillion? And if you are like me, you're going to start getting a little outraged at this. They mentioned that they're going to be raising rates on Wednesday, but that's only the first step to the return to normalcy. That's a whole topic in and of itself, because the interest rate raise, that's going to work out real well for some people and very badly for others. The central bank will also have to decide what to do with the massive assets it picked up during the recession, specifically 4.5 trillion mostly in treasury notes, as well as mortgage-backed securities that were bought up in an attempt to absorb some of the toxic assets. Examine with me, if you will, the twilight zone of statements like this. Okay, they got to decide what to do with it. Because they're expected to do something with it. If they never do anything with it and just keep it on their books forever, it's called monetizing the debt. They just conjure up money from nothing, and the debt that is given to them in the form of these treasury notes, that's an IOU from the government that says, I'll pay you back. That's debt. The mortgage-backed securities is all debt. Somebody took out a mortgage, they promised to pay it back. They're all bundled up in some big securities, hocus pocus, and then sold by banks to whoever's stupid enough to buy them if they're bad. Which in this case, as you'll note, the article says they were bought up in an attempt to absorb some of the toxic assets. I got news for you. If the Fed bought them and the banks wanted to get rid of them, unload them onto you and me, they are all toxic assets. There's no asset to it. They're just toxic. They're likely not to be paid back. The unconventional monetary policy of adding trillions to the balance sheet will require some unconventional methods of spending down. We thought we'd help Janet Yellen out and find out what 4.5 trillion, mind-boggling number, could buy you. Now remember, they're talking about buying something with a bunch of debt. Try that on your own credit card balance. Let's say you owe the credit card company $100,000. What can you buy with the debt that you owe that credit card company? Nothing. And the credit card company can't buy anything with it either unless you're good for it and eventually pay it off. It's all a big lie. It says here that the Fed could outright buy most companies on the S&P 500, blah, blah, blah. And then they go on to talk about, oh, what would be a good pick? What could we buy on the stock market? Which of these stocks could we buy? Yeah. Oh, because we've got 4.5 trillion we could go spend. Horse shit. The Fed has always made clear that its inflated balance sheet was a temporary policy to help stabilize the economy, and that it would return to normal policy as stability returns. But no one knows how to do that. Really? And what the consequences of spending down the mass of funds will be. I know what the consequence of spending down the mass of funds will be. And I'm no expert. How can these idiots who are running the show make statements like this, that they don't know what the consequences will be? It's very simple, and it goes like this. If they try to unload these treasuries, which are holes in the whole universe called debt, they have no value. It's a promise to pay, an IOU. And they try to unload these IOUs that they're stuck with into the bond market. It will utterly explode, implode, collapse, self-destruct instantly. Because right now, nobody's really buying those treasury notes to finance the government's deficit spending because they know it's already in debt over its eyeballs. They don't want to give it any more loans. They're not likely to get paid back. Anybody really think that our government is going to pay back the soon-to-be $20 trillion in officially reported public debt? It's way, way higher than that if you include the unfunded liabilities, up into the hundreds of trillions. Nobody expects them to ever pay it back. Okay, so this is bad debt. Nobody's going to buy it. The Fed can't sell it. They can't get rid of it. So this whole article, the whole premise of this article is ludicrous, that they could clear their inflated balance sheet by selling it into the market, into the bond market. This is not a temporary policy. Mark my words, this is permanent. The Fed will add to its debt. It will buy more treasuries. It will outright monetize the debt when nobody else wants to buy U.S. treasuries, should that come to be the case. And it's talking about how the Fed's balance sheet is 27% of GDP, far above the historical rate of 6%. So the Fed has created so much fake money, this paradigm of debt that we accept as we're dreaming the same dream until somebody wakes up. It's not money, it's debt conjured up by the banks. They get paid interest on the debt they make up out of thin air. That's the game. They go on to talk about other central banks' assets and how big they are compared to their GDPs in their countries. And whoa, what kind of, well, it's Walmart size, it's Caterpillar company sized, how it compares to this amount of debt. And they say that the balance sheet, that is, of the Federal Reserve is worth the sales of the bottom 433 companies on the index in net sales or whatever. Again, they're comparing the debt pile of these treasuries to something that's not debt. It's the sales of companies. You know what? Their income. They're selling stuff. They're making stuff. A vastly different concept than a bunch of debt that was created, conjured, if you will, out of thin air. Final statement. With its massive pile of assets, the Fed could even match the top 30 companies' sales and still have a few billion left over. It's just a total lie. It's not a pile of assets. As I repeat myself, I hope some of this is of value to anyone who's stuck with it through this 8 minutes, 9 minutes of video. It's not assets. It's a liability. The Fed can't unload the liability or it crashes the market, so they're stuck with it. They have no billions left over. They just have the pile of debt they created out of nothing, the beneficiaries of which will be the banks, the giant Wall Street too big to fail and foreign banks, Deutsche Bank, USBC, HSBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyds, Barclays, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs. The names should be familiar to anyone who has become as alarmed as I am about the situation they've put us in and they got the bailout for. But they've made it so much worse now. This pile of debt was created after the crash of '08. The giant market meltdown. This is what they did to try and rescue the banks. They bought up a bunch of government debt, and those treasury bonds go through a banking process before they get to her at the treasury. All the banks that own this Federal Reserve, they own this woman. She does what they tell her to do to benefit them. They're in the middle of this transaction, both coming and going, and they rake massive fees off the top as a result. That's their game. They've created it. They benefit massively. We get screwed, blued, and tattooed out of the process. So I hope you're enjoying it, or we should all be up in arms. That's what this channel is about, outrage. How can we express our outrage constructively? If the government won't listen, then we need to find someone who will. Otherwise, we're just going to keep getting the same treatment. And articles like this. What could the Fed buy with its $4.5 trillion? Well, I can answer that. They could buy diddly, because their $4.5 trillion isn't worth a plug nickel. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please like and share if you found it interesting. This is a new startup channel. Where's the outrage? Well, now you know. Here's the outrage.